Hi hand readers, today I'm talking about baby fingers, specifically bent baby fingers. My name's Jennifer. I'm a long-time practitioner of everything to do with palmistry, chirology and palm reading, hand reading. And I've been asked to talk about baby fingers by a viewer named Joan. Hi Joan, thank you so much for your request. So I'll do a little series on baby fingers, and today we're going to start with a bent baby finger. In the chirological system, the 5-element system of how to read hands, the baby finger is governed by air. It's known as the air finger. Of course, in palmistry, it's the mercury finger. And as I always say, the baby finger has, although it's the littlest finger, it has the biggest story. What is then the big story around the baby finger? Air in chirology, air being the least attached element, the element of detachment, so to speak, relates to communication. And the baby finger gives, the form and features of the baby finger gives some bearing on how we speak and how we communicate. And it also has to do with sexuality and to do with business acumen. So there are three sort of governing areas, three areas where we might find some clues as to how that person functions in those particular areas. And some readers also perceive baby fingers and their various forms and features as being key to the person's sense of self-worth. For those of you who haven't studied hand reading, perhaps I can just mention a few of the things we might look at when we examine a set of baby fingers. Obviously their length, the various knots that might appear in the knuckles. We're looking at whether the finger leans either which way, whether it curves slightly inward or bends inward a lot, that's our topic today of course, or whether it leans outward. We're looking at the relative lengths of the respective phalanges. We look at, and of course each phalange has its own set of meanings depending on the size and length of that phalange and fatness. And then also on the various markings, the bar line, or rather the activation lines and the bar lines which might appear on the phalanges. We're looking also at the set of the baby finger, in other words, how deeply does it retract into the palm of the hand. That is a very important and relevant factor. We're looking at the dermatoglyphic pattern. This is obviously very key as well. That's the fingerprint pattern on the tip. And the flexibility, whether it bends back. You notice my fingers are very flexible, so that's a key in the thinking of the person. And important might be wounds, like is the finger missing, is it damaged, is it wounded, is it scarred? So there's just a few ideas of what we might examine when we look at baby fingers. Bearing in mind that the baby finger has to do with communication, a slight curve of a baby finger that just, when the tip just gently curves inward towards the ring finger, the fire finger in our system, the 5-element system. Here we have the tactful diplomat, the person who is gentle with the spoken word, who abhors verbal violence, who has the so-called good bedside manner, who is sympathetic and consoling, who is quite persuasive in the way that they communicate. So this could be a very positive marking. This is a person who's not given to pressing their opinions on others, somebody who might avoid confrontation, and perhaps on the unredeemed is a little bit intending to avoid confrontation to the point of where they even act sweet when they're feeling anything but. So it's more about tact than it is about the more, let's call it, darker meanings, which I'm going to share with you in a moment. And we have to be a little careful with the interpretation of bent baby fingers. There is an anatomical reason, it's called clinodactyly, and there are times when those of us with bent fingers have actually inherited them. So we are cautioned not to jump too quickly into the rather negative meanings that often go with bent baby fingers. My suggestion is that you ask your clients if one or both of their parents have bent baby fingers, and perhaps then it could sort of soften the interpretation. And now we come to the very difficult marking of a very bent baby finger, where it almost twists a bit on its axis and it bends in towards the finger next to it. And this has such bad press. This is the finger supposedly of the person who lies, who distorts communication channels for vested interest, who is not to be trusted. The shadow meanings, the traditional meanings actually, are all about being shrewd, being devious, being insincere, having a fondness for intrigue, for being clever, for being an astute thinker. A person who might maneuver to outwit is another meaning. They could be evasive, they're unwilling to listen. The list goes on and on. There really are some really pretty tough meanings that might go with this feature. Because obviously the finger represents communication, and the bend and the twist of it shows distortion of communication. The question might be, with bends of baby fingers, where is the line between where tact might end and dishonesty begins? How might we as readers convey to the owner of very bent baby fingers the more redeemed aspects of their feature? Now, obviously, we'd have to embrace and utilize that very tact that we hope that that person has as part of their bend, and not employ and engage in any dishonesty with them. So my suggestion here would be to inquire as to whether they've been lied to as children. So we work into a kind of a counseling theme around honesty and integrity, but we approach it from what might be that person's history. Perhaps their background veered strongly away from the norm. Perhaps they were exposed to a lot of double standards. Perhaps they really suffered at the hands of others. Perhaps they had to use their evasiveness and their shrewdness and so on as a survival strategy. One goes into that kind of an inquiry rather than immediately, metaphorically speaking, pointing a finger and making an assumption that that person is a very deceptive liar. We have to navigate very carefully with a spoken word. We want to really explore with them in the most gentle and tactful way possible what trend in them is inclined to go into distorting the truth, and what might be the source of that traditionally. What is their fear? What is their background? What is their wound? And especially subjectively, where aren't they being honest with themselves? That's a more safe place to begin, rather than judging them for being dishonest people. Another meaning about bent baby fingers, especially if they're particularly bent, is rather unconventional sexual orientations, and especially if there's also a world dermatoglyphic on that baby finger. And here again, if you're coaching and counseling in your hand-reading work, this requires great tact, how to approach it with a person. But there are ways of getting into that conversation in a way that is ethical and unconfrontational. You might on rare occasions meet with somebody whose baby finger bends in the ulnar direction, away from the hand. And this is usually, it's extremely rare actually in my experience, but this would be a person who keeps others at an emotional distance, and a person who has known emotional abandonment in childhood. The chances are that they have some difficulty in sustaining and maintaining intimate relationships. And then lastly, on the topic of bent baby fingers, there are people, very occasional, that have a condition called campodactyly. It's when the baby finger is in a permanently bent inward to the palm formation. They cannot actually straighten it. And in this case, it could show inflexibility in the person. It would show inflexibility, maybe a certain amount of self-centeredness. But this is, of course, more of a medical condition. Also consider that bent baby fingers might be related to medical syndromes and congenital abnormalities. I have written 3 articles about baby fingers. You'll find them at my website on the blog page. I've posted the links below for those of you who'd like to pop into my website and have a look. In next week's video, I'll be talking about a wide-spaced baby finger. That's when the finger juts out sideways. If you'd like to have a reading with me, please email me or find my email address at the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you next week.